Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and let's start for today's subject for Aristotle's ethic. So let's share my screen. Okay, so just like to remind everyone, next week we have no meeting, and then so today we will finish the so-called essence. Okay, so we finish. Socrates, Plato's, and Aristotle's. We take 3 weeks to talk about Aristotle's, including Aristotle's metaphysics, politics, and ethics. And we will take next week off, and then we will go back from the history, go back to the pre-Socratic philosophy. Okay, so I plan to have 2 sections. One is on the Ionian school. It's on the Asian Minor side. And September 12th, I will talk about the Eleatic school, which is on the Italian side. And then we go through the history, go to the Athens and Epicurus, then go through to the Romans. So that's the schedule we plan to do. And just to remember, next week have no meeting, and the week after we will continue. So we spent 7 weeks, and basically we finished the essence. That's the core of all the Western philosophical tradition. I think that's important. So turn out that we spend a lot of time deal with these 3 philosophers, and only Plato and Aristotle have a lot of writing. So turn out that we have to deal a lot. So from after next time, thing will become different, because for the pre-Socratic philosopher, they don't have a lot of writing. Okay, so they are basically they only have a fragment left. So technically, we can go through many philosophers in one meetup. And the next meetup, which is on the September 5th, I post a reading for the Heraclitus writing. Okay, it's very short, so you are welcome to read it and bring up and what do you think about it. So that will be, the style will become a little bit different. Instead of intense book reading, we will have kind of lightly introduce the philosopher and the philosophy, and read some fragment. And so for the next 2 meetings, the style will be a little bit different. So let's move on. And so that's so today we will focus on the Aristotle's ethic, and the book we will read is Nicomachean Ethics. So I will only focus this book, and then hope we will have time, 10-20 minutes, to discuss about Aristotle, Plato, and the overall Asian philosophy. See how do you feel about these philosophers. So I believe everyone know this. Socrates, Plato is Socrates' student. Aristotle is Plato's student. And then Aristotle's philosophy is very different from Plato's philosophy. So Aristotle's lifetime, we already talked about this, and then I will assume everyone will know. And so today we will focus. Last week we talked about politics, right? Aristotle's politics, and the week before we talked about Aristotle's metaphysics and the physics and the logic in this area. Even we don't have time to go all the detail, but in general, we talk about this 2 weeks ago, and last week we talked about politics. And I remember Fred mentioned, raised a good question about, is that necessary to have ethical citizen for a good state? And today we will look at Aristotle's ethics, which actually, Aristotle's ethic has 2 books. One is Nicomachean Ethic, one is Eudemian Ethic. But I haven't read the Eudemian Ethic, and I have no idea on this one. So whoever have read this one, have idea, it's good to bring up, you see the difference, because I find out the Nicomachean ethic is one of very complete ethic theory. So that's why I like to introduce this one for today. So before I start, and then if you have any question, any concern, or please raise your hand. Then we were about to start to talk about Nicomachean ethics. And the Nicomachean is Aristotle's son and the father, both named Nicomachean. So we don't know it means his father or his son, but I think most likely is his son and compile Aristotle's lecture note and do it. And personally, I think this one is probably the best ethic textbook, in my personal opinion. When I review this one more time for this meetup, I find out it's quite complete, So that's why I like to share. Okay, John, yeah, please, yeah.
I was just going to ask, do you have closed captioning on this? Because I noticed it was on the YouTube channel.
Oh yeah. We posted on the YouTube.
But
so,
not on the live one.
No, not live one. Yeah, not live.
Okay, thank you.
After that, you can see in the YouTube. Okay. So is there any other question? Okay, so we will start. So I like to read this one because that's I'm not sure McGill masterpiece of word philosophy. That's a very old book, and then actually I like this book, and then I think the comment is pretty interesting. Talk about Nicomachean ethics is part of vast scientific and philosophical system. I think this book is kind of, you can call ethical science, okay, or science of ethics, to which a teleological view of the universe is a basic. All things are to be understood in terms of their purpose, the end toward which they tend and inherit in their form, and integral to their nature. So Nicomachean ethics is a kind of naturalism, but that's misspelled, but not a reduction. Okay, so it's different than other ethical books like Kant, okay, critique of pure reason, but critique of practical reason, or the groundwork of metaphysics of ethics, which is talking about the meta-ethics. But this one is not a reductionism, it's a naturalism. It's a how-to book. So I will claim this book is very different than other ethical theory. Okay. So let's start from book one. Okay, so as we know, okay, if assume we are familiar with Aristotle, everything toward to its end is teleological. So book one, basics talk about arete, the virtue, okay, and from the virtue to the happiness. He said very clear. And then when we talk about happiness, actually the word is eudaimonia, and eu is good. Daimon means soul. So basically talk about good soul. So in the eudaimonia, we translate as a happiness, but actually it's more than happiness. For example, you achieve something, you finish reading a book, and you even through a lot of struggle, and eventually you finish the reading. The satisfaction also considered as eudaimonia. So that's what he's talking about. So I just summarize a few important message from book one. He said every art and every increase, and similarly every action and every pursuit is sought to aim at some good. Okay, so everybody toward pursuing good, And for this reason, the good has rightly been declared to be that at all things end. So he's talking about everyone, everybody ending to some good. Okay, so all the action we are doing are toward the good. For even if the end is the same as single man and the four slave, for a state, that of a state seems at all events something greater and more complete. So the second point, Aristotle is talking about the politics, right? So basically, if everyone is pursuing the good, then if everyone in the state pursuing the good, that will be become a greater and the more complete. So here he talking about the political science. So if everyone pursuing good, they were moving toward to the politics. And then he talk about what is human good, right? So verbally, there is very general agreement for both the general wrong of man and the people of the superior refinement, says that is happiness, and identify living well and doing well with being happy. So happiness, eudaimonia, is associated with living well and doing well. So we can easily put this chart on his logic for to simplify book one. Basics, Aristotle is talking about arete, virtue. When we're doing virtue, basics, we are striving for excellence. And actually, why we are doing this? Because it's living well, doing well. That's the reason. And why we want to living well, doing well? Eudaimonia is the purpose. That's the end. And then, according to Aristotle, eudaimonia or happiness, that's the end. It's self-sufficient. There's no more question because you cannot ask why you want to pursue eudaimonia or happiness, right? The example is a doctor treat a patient, right? He want to the patient be cured the disease. He want the patient to eat well, exercise well, and be healthy. But healthy is the end. You cannot ask why you want to be healthy because that's the end. So in this book, the book one, Aristotle is making very clear. When you pursue virtue, when you try to do virtue, arete, basics, you are ending to the happiness, eudaimonia. So he's not going to argue why you want to do this one, like Jeremy Benson, right? He keep talking about the utilitarian. So he is trying to convince you pursuing happiness is your nature. But Aristotle is not going to tell you this. Aristotle is already talk about this. And the rest of the book, he is going to tell you is how to. So basically, this book is not a theory about the reduction or logic, try to convince you doing good. This book is a how-to book, tell you how to do good, how to be moral. So based on this assumption, he moved to his book two. Okay. So in book two, basically, he make it clear. Okay, when we talk about, so right now we already clear, everyone want to be virtue and moral virtue. And then there's two virtues. Hold on. There's two virtues, intellectual virtue and the moral virtue. And the virtue of thought, that's the intellectual virtue, which can be, is teachable, it's from your nature. And the virtue of characters, which is moral virtue, okay, it's from your habit. So moral virtue basically is not to know what virtue is, but it's to become good. So this book is going to tell you how to become good. So true virtue is both action and the state. So state of soul, he talked about emotion, capability, and the disposition. And that's the one usually called the human function. So, okay, so then he talked about the question might be asked, what we mean by saying that we must become just by doing just acts and temperate by doing temperate acts. So here is the example. He used the example is if they do what is in accordance with the law of grammars and the music, they are grammarians and the musicians. Here he is talking about example. You cannot just know the grammar and without speaking or writing words, right sentence, right? And you cannot just know music without playing music to become a musician. So another example, I think the typical example would be riding bicycle and the swimming, right? You cannot call a person know how to ride bicycle without riding the bicycle. And then a person who know how to swim means he's swimming well. And you don't care whether or not he know the theory of swimming. So you call a person swimmer, he must swim. He cannot just know the technical of swimming. He has to practice. So that's he tried to talk about the moral value because it's about your both action and your mental state. So on the second part, he talked about of book 2. He talked about very important philosophy according to Aristotle, so-called the doctrine of the mean, right? You have to find the balance between the vice of defect and excess, right? So if he talked about the courage, use the example, right? If you cannot be overconfident or you cannot be cowardly, you find the balance. And he knows when we talk about the mean, it's not the middle. Basically, he didn't use the word golden mean, but that's what he meant, golden mean. He finds the right balance, and which depend on who you are and depend on the situation. That's Aristotle trying to talk about. And then for the rest of the book, he's going to tell you how to find the mean. And here he gives you some general ideas. He gives the 3 guidelines. So first, you have to stay away from the extreme. So if you know that extreme, right, deficiency and excess, right, you should stay on the extreme. Secondly, you have to notice your weakness. So you have the tendency from your prior experience, you have a tendency to do something which caused the problem. So you have to stay away. And the number 3, you have to always pay attention about the pleasure part. So if you feel you physically, sensually enjoy on something, you have to worry. Remember, he doesn't say avoid, okay? Because he recognized human nature always toward to pleasure, to happiness. So he doesn't say, he just have to give you a warning. You have to worry when pleasure is on the line. So that's his idea in the book 2 about the doctrine of mind, of the mean. Marika, please.
Yes, can you explain a little bit more? What is be wary when pleasure is on the line? What does, I mean, is he talking about pleasure like what?
Oh, when he talk about pleasure, usually he talk about sensual, okay, sensual pleasure. For example, overeat. If you eat, you find out chips, potato chips is good, satisfied. So give you pleasure. So you will have a tendency of overeating, right? So which is not healthy, it's not good. And when you realize this, you have to be careful on this. He doesn't say avoid, but you have to be careful on this side. That's what he meant.
He's saying to be moderate. I mean, the
moderate. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. If you want to put this way, everything should be moderate. That's his point. So later on, we will have a more example not example, he will break down to more detail one by one and tell you what does he mean of the doctrine of the mean, or be moderate, or try to find golden means. So I hope I answer your question. Any other question or any other comment?
It's very hard to do, you know, though, some of these things that he's talking about. It would be easy, it would be nice, but it's not that easy. That's the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I know. Everybody know being ethical is not that easy, but it's easy to talk. It's not easy to work. Thank you, Douglas. So let me see. Okay, so let's go to book 3. Okay, so here he talk about, so right now he already make it clear, you have to be moderate. And then book 3, he's talking about how to, right? You have how to find the golden mean, how to find the mean, the doctrine of the mean, because it's easy to say, just like Douglas said, it's easy to say we just be moderate and find the balance to avoid, but how to? So basically, he is talking about you have to be voluntary, or you want to call it willful, okay, to deliberation and the choice. So basically, you have to make choice, okay? It's not like let go. Basically, he's talking about making choice. So decision play a key role in virtue. All decisions are voluntary, but again, not all voluntary acts are decisions, okay? So deliberate to find the right. So virtue and the vice are in our power. So here he talk about virtue, okay, is in our power. Okay, you
Jason,
can do
stop,
virtue.
don't spank me, Jason. Don't.
Okay, should we take care of this one?
Yes,
Okay.
Tom's, take him out.
Okay, great, thank you.
I think I removed and reported him.
Okay, great, thank you. So I have a Greg, I also make you a co-host, so we will have
Okay.
one more head. Okay, yeah, okay. So right now we are pretty good now. So just one. Okay. So virtue and the vice are in our power. So the end and then being what we wish for, the means, okay, means what we deliberate about and choose, and the action concerning the end must be according to choice and voluntary. Now, the exercise of the virtue is concerned with means. Therefore, virtue also is in our own power, and so to vice. Okay, both virtue and vice are in our own power. It is in our power to be virtuous or vicious. That's his talking. People should not be punished for the action caused by ignorance, but be punished for their ignorance. So he already make this kind of ignorance will cause vice, right? But you don't be punished for the consequence, but you punish for your ignorance. So here Aristotle make a breakout a difference from Socrates. Socrates said nobody willing to vice, right? Vice, okay? Because for his example, well, not his example, but one example is the person knows smoking is not good, but he keeps smoking. The reason is he doesn't know the harm of smoking well enough. If he know well enough, he will quit smoking. So here, Aristotle is making difference, this one, because in his point of view, vicious action is where it's on your will, it's choice. You make a wrong choice. that's you in your power, not the you don't know, not your, because you you are willing to making error or act viciously. So book 3, he bring, when he talk about in the book 2, he talk about doctrine of the mean, right? Then he talking about the how to do it, how to make a choice. Basically, he talk about deliberation and the choice. And then he give the 2 example. Well, I will not say example because 2 things he has to deal. Okay, one is courage, another one is temperance. Okay, so it will be clear later why he deal these 2 in book 3. Because when you deal with pen, okay, well, here we have to make one break about the Aristotle's soul. When Aristotle talk about soul, we have the rational soul and irrational soul. So here he deal with irrational soul. So talk about your body, animal soul. Okay. So how do you deal with pain? Okay. So when you deal with pain, that's he calls bravery, the virtue called bravery. So bravery is not absence of fear, but the fear of the right thing. Okay. So the brave person is hopeful and confident, showing courage when it is necessary. So he give an example of a madman, or we call it the rationalist, right? You feel nothing at all. So he called the rationalist. Or coward, he feel the wrong thing in the wrong way. When you see a noise, you hide it, or you hide in at home, never go out because you worry, about everything. So bravery is something in between. So it's not feel nothing, okay, and it's not feel everything. It's in between. So that's what he talked about. And remember, here he's talking about irrational soul. He talk about how does our animal soul or irrational soul deal with pain. So a brave person has a natural aversion to death and the pain, and the take sacrifice serious. So you still try to avoid death, still avoid pain, but you will be careful. And I think he put the example is a brave person is not ideal candidate for a soldier, because if you a general, you sometimes you don't want, you want your soldier, be a little bit on the rationalist side, because the soldier should not afraid of death, something like this. So that's the part on courage. And the next part in book 3, he deals with temperance. Okay, the difference of temperance here, he's still talking about the animal soul, the irrational soul. So how to deal with pleasure? Okay, so brave is dealing with pain, and then temperance is dealing with pleasure. So when you deal with pleasure, he called it self-indulgence. Okay, so here's a translation problem, because I don't know what's exactly the Greek word, and some modern translation will use gluttonous. Okay, so but my translation uses.
What do you want?
Okay, yeah, the self-indulgent man. Okay, then crave for all pleasure things and all those that are most pleasant, and is led by his appetite to choose this at the cost of anything else. Hence, he is pained both when he failed to get them and when he is merely craving for them. But it seems absurd to be pained for the sake of pleasure. So his example is, I think he used belly god, but of course he's not talking about the Chinese Buddha, this kind of thing, but his word is belly god. I don't know what he meant in Greek, belly god, but he's talking about overeat. And remember, here he talks about overeat is is you are wearing over it. Okay, so not kind of lack of control over it. So you eat so much and you seeking pleasure too much, and to the way you be pained because you are seeking pleasure. So on this end, it's not good. But on the other end, he called it insensibility. Okay, or you want to call it intemperance. Okay, so the word is very difficult to define because the Greek and they use different words, but the insensibility is not human. Okay, that's not human. He talked about even the other animal distinguish different kinds of food and enjoy some and not others. So here he talked about insensibility. He talking about the people who are how do you say it? Ascetic monk, this kind of people. Okay, so you are wearing the not eating, not enjoy the present. Okay, to the extreme. So it's also not good. So he called it insensibility. It's not human. So a temperament occupied the middle position with regard to the object. So for the temperance, you have to be balanced between too much pleasure and then no pleasure at all. You have to stay in between. That's what he's talking about in book 3. So book 3 basics, he talked about 3 things, right? He talked about the doctrine of the choice. Okay, in the book 2, he talked about doctrine of the mean. Then he talked about you have the deliberation and the choice, and then he gives 2. He deals with your irrational part of soul, which one deal with the pain, that's courage. One deal with pleasure, which is temperance. And both, you have to avoid both ends and then find the golden mean in this way. So that's the finish of book 3. And then we have a question or any comment?
I have one, Jason. On the first slide, on book 3, can you go back to that first slide?
Yeah, this one?
Yeah, I'm not clear on how we got to the place of punished, because I'm not seeing it developed out of the first 2.
Hold on, the punished. Okay, you say you should not be punished.
Right, and I'm not sure where we got to that concept or how we got to that concept of punishment, but I'm also not sure how we determine what it says, but be punished for their ignorance. So I guess I'm not seeing where we got to either ignorance or punishment in the first 2. Am I making sense?
Okay, I think punishment probably should read as guilty. Okay, if we put this way. Okay, so
Could I give an example?
yeah,
here?
please.
Yes, please,
Yeah,
yes.
great, please, yes.
You travel to another country and you violate the law,
Okay,
but you don't know what this law is about because in your country, you don't have that law. That does not release you from the consequences of violating this law in another country. So, like, your ignorance of the law of another country doesn't relieve you from the consequences and for the penalty. So that's what he's talking about. You're not being necessarily punished by but even you're punished even for ignorance. If you're ignorant of it, you still deserve the punishment.
Yeah, I mean, I get that concept. It's just, wait a minute. Be punished for but the action is what makes you aware of the ignorance, or I don't know. Is it I don't know. There's something about the structure of the sentence that doesn't follow for me from the first 2. That's all.
Yeah, the action is the violation. You're acting in violation of the law, and if you are knowingly doing it, then you're punished for the violation itself. you're doing it unknowingly, there is some circumstances that makes it lighter. Probably you're not going to have the same level of punishment but it still will be some level of punishment.
Okay, so you're seeing that inherent in there, that punishing for not knowing should not necessarily be as severe as punishing for knowing and doing anyway. Is that what you mean?
Mhm.
Yes, but it shouldn't be absent. It's still, the punishment still be
There
there.
should be consequence because that's how you learn the
Right.
virtue, right? Okay, got it. I
Yeah,
wasn't,
thank you, Greg. Yeah, I think it's another way to look at it. I think that's a great example when you travel to the foreign country, right? But you still deliberate and make choice, right? But
right, and I just wasn't seeing that specifically developed, so I wasn't sure that's what it meant, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay.
The rest of it all made sense to me though. Thank you, Jason.
all right, thank you. At least it makes sense. Yeah, okay. Fred, please.
I believe what Aristotle said in that section, this is book 3, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's book 3.
I
Yeah.
think he qualified it a bit and said that people should be punished for the action caused by their ignorance if they are responsible for that ignorance.
Yeah.
And the example that Aristotle gave was somebody who does something terrible when they're drunk, when they're dead drunk. So they may not have been aware of what they are doing when they're drunk, but they are responsible for their actions. Even when they're not aware of it, they're responsible for getting drunk because that led to the action.
Mhm. Thank you, Fred. Yeah, that's his example. Okay. Okay, and I hope everyone can, who read this one can provide more information, because when I prepare this one, I have to admit the Aristotle's, each book is dense, okay? And then technically we will probably have like one meeting for one book. And then, but I just try to summarize thing I think important. So if you read something and I miss something in certain book, please bring up, and I think that will help. Okay, so let's move on book 4. Okay, book 4, in a way, it's a very dense, but in a way, it's easy to understand if you put in the big picture, because he already deal with bravery and temperance, which is your animal part of soul. And right now he deal with the virtue of soul, okay? So that's your rational part of soul. Basically, you are thinking, you use logos, you use reason to think, and then making decision, deliberate and making decision. So which is deal with your soul. And here he lists the 5 different virtues. And again, it's also applied to the doctrine of the mean, right? So he separates us when you deal with money, deal with your honor, anger, social intercourse, and something he called the quasi virtue, which is a passion. Okay, it's a little bit different here. So Marika, please.
Yeah, this is a general question, but he's so into describing each item. It's like a dictionary and trying to be so clear. Was other philosophers that they were so eager to be clear and descriptive and teachy like him, or this is very specific of him?
Yeah, actually, I think about this question, and I plan to have a discussion at the end. So I'm glad that you bring up this question, because at the end we probably want to discuss on this one. And in my point of view, I don't see he try to provide a dictionary, because only on this part he do it. And then, and that's Aristotle's style. He tried to exhaust all the possibility and give each one a definition. So that's his style. So let's take a look on this one. When he deal with money, okay, he talk about liberality, okay, which is a state between meanness and wastefulness. So he's talking about taking money and giving money. And he talked about the magnificent, which is stinginess, okay, to the vulgarity, okay. So here, Aristotle talking about the scale of money is different. If you like a donation, okay, so you should not become vulgarity, okay, because you are spending too much. I think it's related to your style, your attitude. Okay, so Aristotle also talk about in the larger scale. Okay, you should be magnificent, and the liberality is in the daily. I think it's in the daily spending and the taking money. You should not be wasteful, and you should not be mean. You have to find the balance in between. That's he talk about virtue dealing with money. Then he talk about dealing with honor, right? So he talk about pride. Okay, so pride is also stay in the balance with the unduly humble and vain. So you have to stay in between. That's different than Christian teach. Christian teach will be say pride is a sin. Okay, you should be humble. But Aristotle is talking about this. You should be stay between unduly humble and vain. So that's pride. And dealing with your future things, okay, you should become a right ambition. So for most of the part, they have, even Aristotle doesn't have the right word to describe. He just has a long description. And when you read the translation, the translator try to substitute with some word. So so don't be surprised when you read other translation and they say something different. So here's the one I believe is the correct one. So I use the right ambition, and it stays between ambition. That means you have no desire to achieve anything, to over ambition. Basically, you are aiming something too big. Okay, so that's deal with your honor. Then when you deal with your, oh, hold on, sorry. Just 1 minute. So when, oh, just 1 minute. Okay, so you see my screen? Yeah. Okay, so when you deal with anger, okay, so you have to be so-called a good temper or mildness. So which is stay between sulky and hot temper. So that's what he's talking about. But he is not talking about absence of anger. He's talking about be anger at the right time for the right reason. Okay. So then when you deal with social, you talk about friendliness. That's your attitude. Okay. It's different. Friendliness is different than friendship. He will deal with friendship later in the book 8 and the book 9. But here he talk about virtue. Friendship is not virtue. Friendliness is virtue. So you should not be quarrelsomeness. And then if you go to the other end, become flattery. So you have to, the way you treat your friend should be stay in between. And the attitude, your word should be, you should be truthfulness. So truthfulness is between the boastfulness and the self-depression. Okay, so that's what he's talking about. Then he talk about the ready wit, which is kind of humor, okay, for enjoy when you deal with your friend. So he called the buffoonishness, okay, if you become a clown or doing too much, or become the moroseness, okay, which means no fun and no feeling at all. And then the last one, he deal with the passion, which is shame. In the Greek words are idols. Okay, so you should not be shamelessness, okay, which you care for opinions of no one, you don't care at all, or timid, which you care for every single opinion of everyone. So you have to stay in between. Yeah. Fred, please.
Regarding the comprehensiveness of these description of virtue, he also uses these as examples where he describes the characteristics of virtue. And he has some interesting ideas along that line. For example, with liberality, virtue with money, makes a point that your virtue is not dependent on the amount of money that you give, but on what you give relative to your means and what you're giving it for. So which is sort of like, in Christianity, the widow's mite. It's not the amount that you give, but it's depends on the sacrifice that you make personally.
Yeah, I think, okay. So, but I think that he talked about, I don't know you agree or not. He talked about the difference between the magnificence and the liberality in the scales different. He's not talking, he talked about the different virtue is when you deal with large amount of money and deal with a small amount of money. And what large and small is depend on how much you have. I think that's what at least that's what I read.
Yeah, I recall that it was also magnificence, which is an odd word. I wonder if that is actually supposed to be munificence, but
okay,
whatever.
Yeah, I will provide different translation. If you look at this one, that's just the translation I use. Okay, so if you go to the internet, you probably will find a lot of different way to talk about this. If you can take a few minutes to look at this, that's the table I collect. And if you search from internet, you probably will find more. So all of them have a different, depend on how you read it, what background you have, how do you understand. So you will see they different people, they understand in a different way, and they all provide different kind of translation. So and it's easy. I have to agree. None of the word proper. Joe, you have hands up.
Hey, I was just struck by how much this is like the principles of the founding of our country. It was supposed to aim for moderation, and it was thought that wisdom wasn't found in the extremes. And I believe Madison was working on his sort of plan that there would be a balance of power and things would check each other. And the Senate was supposed to be like a cooling chamber for anything the House did. I mean, it's quite, I never knew exactly what it was inspired by, but it is amazing. And the body too goes for homeostasis. So I was just thinking that's what we aim for, is balance.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So let's move on, and then I do want to finish the whole book. So okay. So right now, I just quickly interrupt to introduce, just to make sure everyone knows the Greek cardinal virtues, which is different than Christian virtues. Both Aristotle and Plato, they all on the background, living on the background of Greeks, four cardinal virtues, which is so sometimes translated as fortitude, bravery. Okay, it's we already talked about in book 3, and they talk about temperance, right? And temperance, they also talk about in the book 3, and the prudence and the justice. Okay, so prudence, a lot of time the translation will use wisdom, but here I need to remind everyone here. In Greek, when we talk about wisdom, we talk about two kinds of wisdom. One is Sophia, which is intellectual wisdom, and the prudence, phronesis, okay, which is practical wisdom. So the four cardinal virtues here, Aristotle is talking about the phronesis, which is practical wisdom. So in the book 4, okay, here we talk about all this one is about prudence, because you have to use the rational thought to decide what's the right balance, okay, between two vices. So that's why he deals with the four cardinal virtues, and one thing left is justice. So that's why he moved to book 5, deal with justice. So justice is different, right? Because you don't find the balance, right? So out bravery, you have the balance. Justice, you always pursue justice. You always stay away in injustice. Nobody will say, okay, let's stay between over justice and injustice. No, it's nothing like this, because justice itself is the end. So in his definition, there's a two part to deal with justice. One is justice outer nature. One is inner nature. So basics, the outer nature is talking about basics is the deal with the politics, right? We see that all men means by justice that kind of state of character which make people disposed to do what is just and make them act justly and wish for what is just. It's not only in your act and you wish for just and you want people act justly. So the just is the lawful and the fair, and unjust is unlawful and unfair. So here he deals with two kinds of justice. One is universal justice, which is justice as lawfulness. So maintaining happiness in political community by creating laws for the common good. So this one is still in politics. And then particular justice, right? Basically talking about two things, the distributive justice and the rectificatory justice. Okay, so he talking about the distributive justice is according to geometrical proportion, and the rectificatory justice according to arithmetical proportion. So remember, other virtues, he's talking about the golden mean. And for justice, he's talking about proportional. So you get what you contribute. That's what he called justice. And then his example is talking about the, he used the example as a builder, he built a house, and the shoemaker makes shoes. And the proportions relation between the builder and the shoemaker. And the house, the builder has exchange for the house, and then he built a house for the shoemaker, and shoemaker makes shoes for that. And then I have to admit, why one is geometric proportion, one is arithmetic proportion, I just said beyond my understanding. I try to read the paper. There's some paper talk about this, but you know, I think it's difficult, at least for me. So that's what he's talking about the justice. And it's not finding the golden mean, but it's finding the right proportion. And for the last part, he also talked about the inner part of justice, the inner nature of justice, which is deal with personal. So I make this Venn chart to make the understand. So basically, this one is your virtue. The outer nature basically is talking about law and the politics, but this part is talking about the virtue. So he talked about you have the voluntary act and involuntary act, right? Like breathing is involuntary and eating is voluntary, but breathing and eating is nothing about just or unjust. But all the just act must be voluntary. So like donating money, you don't just involuntarily donate money, so that's just. But for the unjust act, sometimes it's voluntary, some are involuntary. So for example, murdering, okay, so the unjust act, okay, not all how to say that? All the just acts are voluntary, but not all unjust acts are voluntary, okay, because some are voluntary, some are involuntary. And he lists that the degree of wrongdoing, which is involuntary. So for example, mistake. Okay, so for example, he gives example friendly fire. Okay, this kind of thing, that's the mistake. And one thing he called misadventure. That means that the consequence is contrary to the reasonable experience of thought. You think doing this way, but it happened the other way. And another thing is act of injustice with knowledge, but not deliberating. That's like manslaughter. Okay, that's another example. So I think Greg also gives an example like you go to other country and you are not familiar with the law of the country, and then you do something unjust, but because your knowledge is different. You don't have enough knowledge about the country. So that's how he deals with justice. Two parts. One is about politics, and the other part is your virtue. And then that's he talking about on book 5. So he's more to talk about political justice, natural justice. Okay, he also talk about the family. Okay, so his justice go to more. Okay, domestic justice. Okay, so that's deal with in your family relationship, decency also part of, or respectfulness. Okay, also part of justice. This one is not find the main basics. He talking about the virtue. Okay, the justice. And then to the end, he answered 2 interesting questions, right? Can a man be voluntarily being treated unjustly? Or can a man treat himself unjustly? I think his answer is yes. I'm not sure his answer is not very clear, but I think the question is very interesting. So here we deal with book 5, justice. I will pause for a few questions or comment or something, people who already read this part with some additional information. So we good? Then we move on. Okay, so let's see this part. So here we do some let's do some comparison with virtue, since we already finished the all the 4 virtues, right? It's very clear the difference between Aristotle and Plato. So remember, in Plato's Republic, he also deals with virtue. He deals with the virtue with different people, different class of people. He'll focus on different virtue. So for the producer, that's the regular people, should deal with temperance. For the soldier, auxiliary should deal with courage. And then for the ruler or the philosopher kids, deal with wisdom. And then the whole society will toward to justice, which is the ultimate good. So you will see how different between Platonic virtue and Aristotelian virtue. How do they deal the virtue totally different? So we already done all the so-called the virtual part. And then here, the practical virtue or moral virtue. So right now we are going to deal with another kind of virtue, which is the intellectual virtue. So here he talking about contemplative intellect, okay, the truth, and the calculative intellect, okay, which is make a right choice. Okay. So he famously make 5 kind of intellectual virtue. Okay, this one is not moral virtue; it's intellectual. Okay, so remember at the book 2, he talked about the intellectual virtue and the moral virtue. So book 3, 4, 5, okay, talk about moral virtue, and the book 6 he talked about intellectual virtue. He talked about Sophia, okay, which is theoretical wisdom, and then scientific reasoning. Okay, so basics is doing science. Okay, And here he talk about intuitive understanding, nous, okay, intellectual, general translation, intellectual, and then prudence is also kind of use reason. It's also kind of, and the he called the craft knowledge is skill, art. So for you master some instrument, technical is also considered wisdom for its sake, for its own sake. So that's the part he talked about intellectual wisdom. So here it's time to review what he talked about soul, right? For Aristotle, that's related to his soul, the plant soul, which is vegetative soul, and animal soul, which is sensitive soul. When we deal with the bravery and temperance, talking about the animal soul. And then later he talked about the rational soul, which is two parts, intellectual and the moral virtue. So intellectual virtues connect with conduct. So basically he talked about three things, right? Goodness in deliberation, and the correctness of thinking. He talked about goodness of understanding, and finally he talked about judgment. So that's the intellectual. Okay. So just quick comparison between the soul between Plato and Aristotle, right? Plato talk about, if you remember, it's a rational soul can tripartite soul, right? Compare the appetitive soul and the spiritual soul, and then Aristotle's soul is different. There's a plant, animal, and the human. So human have all three kinds of soul all together. So that's how he deals with soul, and that's what makes some difference when he deals with virtues. So here we done with virtues. Okay, so and remember, all the virtues is related to your soul, and you use your will to do it. So it's nothing like unwillingly doing something. It's all use your will. So when you did something vicious act, which is willing doing something wrong. Marika, please.
Yes, I have a question about what is appetitive, because my understanding is that Plato was more kind of demeaning the body and everything that all the appetites of the body were bad, and the ideal was the perfection. So what is the soul of the appetitive? What does it mean here?
You mean in the
In the comparison?
Yeah. So in Plato's idea, appetitive soul is your nature desire for food, desire for sex, desire
which is bad.
Which is bad. Okay.
Yeah.
It's nature things, and you have a spiritual, so you toward to the ultimate good. So you have to use the rational part to control. Basically, you will, because this one is energy, right? You cannot totally get rid of that. So you have to control it and let this one go. So that's kind of Plato's idea, which if you think in the modern term would be the Freud idea, right? You talk about it, you talk about super ego, you talk about ego, right? So basically that's the idea. And then Aristotle is a bit more scientific. Basically, he talk about all human, we all strive for survive, which is vegetative soul. Okay, you want to reproduce, you want to eat, you want to breathe, you want to grow. Okay, so but you also like animal, right? You need sex, you need food, you need fighting, you need to go out, you have any activity you need to do. And the human is different. Human has these two plus the rational part of soul, which you can use reason, which is local. That's the difference. Marika, you still have a hands up? Or
Yeah. I'm sorry. One thing that I find strange that they don't talk about survival when, I mean.
I think the animal part is a survival. right? Because you need this one is to survive, right?
Right.
You have a sort of aggression because you need to survive.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So let's move on to this one. Okay, book 7. I think this part is confusing, but if we make it clear, they will not get confused. Okay, so book 7. Okay, to book 1 to book 6, Aristotle deal with virtue, but virtue is different than moral. Okay, so so here he deals with something unintentional or involuntary. So he called it incontinence. Okay, so he talked about people have 6 different variety of character, vice and the virtue. Okay, so you want to stay between, right? But not between. You want to pursue virtue. Virtue is between 2 vices in general. And then he talked about the brutishness and superhuman. Okay, so godlike person. And the brutishness, his example is cannibalism or some madman. He says this kind of people are very rare. Okay, and because either they are sick or they are grow up in the wrong culture, like barbarian, cannibalism. And superhuman are also rare. And his example is Hector, okay, in the Trojan War. His father praised him as godlike people. So this one is rare. Okay, so he doesn't deal with this one. And then the vice and the virtue, he already deals. So right now he wants to deal is incontinence and continence. Okay, so the difference here is continence is self-control, you use will. Incontinence is fail to use one's will. Okay, so continence and temperance are different. Temperance and intemperance, okay, it's a virtue and a vice, but they both temperance and intemperance are using your will, okay, but continence is using your will and incontinence is not using your will. Okay, so his example is incontinence. Incontinence is like a city have a good law, but not enforcing. And the vice, okay, which intemperance is one kind of vice. Okay, it's like a city who had a bad law but enforce it. So you are willing doing something wrong. So that's the difference between continence and the temperance. Okay, so incontinence is worse than but intemperance is worse than incontinence. That's his point of view, because incontinence is no regret. Okay. So that's the difference between continence and incontinence. So here he will deal with continence, okay, and when continence deal with pain and pleasure. So let me, how do we do that? So, okay, so the continence people, okay, when he deal with pleasure, okay, he control his desire for pleasure, and then incontinent people will overcome by their pleasure. So that would be different than the temperance, right? The continent people, they control their pleasure, and the incontinent pleasure, they were not using will, overcome by the pleasure. So his example, and so that's when you deal with pleasure. But when the continence deal with pain, right? So you will become endurance. Okay, so if you can totally control the fear of pain, you call it endurance. That's one kind of continence. But softness is another kind of incontinence, is overcome by pain. That means you are not using will, which is different than bravery. So he talked about, since continence and incontinence is not necessarily virtuous or vicious, right? Because sometimes continence can be a vice, and sometimes incontinence could be a virtue. Okay. So his example is interesting. He talked about continence to the extreme is bad. So his example is supporting every opinion, even the bad idea. Okay, that's a vice. Okay, but you are continence, and incontinence could be good because somebody has a bad idea, but you are lazy, you don't use well, you don't support the bad idea. So it could be good. So that's Aristotle's example. So here's the book, book 7 about the continence and incontinence on that. So I'm going to move on the book. There's another part on the book 7. He deals with pleasure. All right. So he tried to answer the criticism about the pleasure. Okay, remember, pleasure is different than eudaimonia. Pleasure and happiness is different. Happiness and eudaimonia is always good. But pleasure, here's the question. There are some people, that he raised 3 questions. Some people think there's no pleasure is good, either for itself or incidentally. But his answer is prudence and temperance. Okay, the people are not hindered by pleasure because they can enjoy the pleasure. Use your prudence or your practical wisdom and temperance, which is your irrational part, animal part of soul, to control the pleasure, not too much, not totally avoid, so you can enjoy the pleasure. And some people will criticize that some pleasure are good, but most are bad. And then his answer is pleasure must be good. Okay, it is contrary. So his logic is pleasure is the opposite of pain, and the happiness is opposite of, is to avoid pain. So so you have to so he talked about the excellent people always seek good, which is pleasure. And then he answered the 3rd question is all pleasure are good, but the best thing is cannot be pleasure. But he said, Aristotle's answer, you can choose the worthy pleasure. So make it simple. Basically, he is talking about the with your prudence or practical wisdom and control, temperance, you can enjoy the pleasure. Okay, and when he talk about pleasure, he talk about bodily, sensual pleasure. So just like Marika asked the question, it's totally different than Plato's idea. Aristotle will think enjoy pleasure is not only virtue, it's also good to do that. So before we move on, then I will pose for question or comment. Here's book 8 and the book 9 will deal with friend, and then we will conclude now for today. Okay, so I'm going to move on the book 8 and the book 7. I'm not going to go to detail, which this one is very rich and it's famous for Plato, but it's easy to summarize. Okay, so that's why I can make it easy, because he talked about friendship. It's both necessary and noble. And remember, friendship is not a virtue. And I remember last week when we talked about politics, someone asked a question about I think Aristotle talked about 4 relationships, right? The statesman and the people, master and the slave, father and the son, husband and the wife, and they are all different relationships. And someone asked, how about people to people? And in politics, Aristotle didn't talk about people to people, but here he talked about people to people, and he called it friendship. And his definition of friendship is different, and which will also lead to the community, which is the politics. Okay. So he talked about very famous 3 kinds of friend: friend of utility, friend of pleasure, pleasure of good. Okay, so that's 3 kinds of friendship he's talking about. Then he talked about it's common sense, right? If you expand your friendship to larger, then you talk about politics. So here again, he talk about his politic view, right? So he talk about the best is monarchy, and the second best is aristocracy, and the third best is democracy. Here is a little bit different than what he talk about politics, and the scholar probably have a different view on that. So I think one view is aristocracy talk about rule by the virtuous people, and the democracy here he probably defined by the representative government, like elected represent this kind of view. And the division form, that means when the monarchy fail, will become tyrant. Okay, and when aristocracy fail, become oligarchy. And when democracy fail, will become democracy. So that's his view on the politics. So he repeat, and he also talk about family is kind of friendship bound by pleasure and unity. So just quick review on the Plato also talk about the state, and the Plato has a different view, right? He talk about democracy will become oligarchy, oligarchy will become democracy, democracy turn out to become tyranny, and what we need to do is have a philosopher king of that. So that's about politics. So
Oh, excuse me,
yeah, great, yeah.
I just wanted to say that they also have some similarity, because Plato also thinks that the enlightened monarchy is the best type of rule,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So they kind of agree on that part, that the best would be enlightened monarchy.
This one monarchy. So
Yeah,
both
both.
believe this one is the best. Yeah.
Right, and Plato and Aristotle both agree on that.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Well, what made them look at it from those standpoints? That's what I'm trying to find out.
You know, I think, for instance, democracy, they suffered from democracy. Specifically, you know, that Socrates was basically executed by the democracy. They thought that they have seen democracy at its worst when the mob rules, because mob could be easily manipulated by demagogues, and then it, you know, they could actually do all kinds of bad things.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why they all kind of praise and the monarchy. They even here to Hegel, you know, also think about the enlightened monarchy is the best. Yeah. So okay, so let's finish it. Okay, on the book 9. Okay, so I think that we can finish this one. So book 9 basically continue on the friendship, and they basically focus on relationship. So he raised some that's it's amazing, you know, how Aristotle think. You know, he always think about all different kind of possibility. So he had the 3 kind of friendship. Then he raised the question, how about one? I think you are the I'm Joe, a friend, and I think Joe are my utility friend, but Joe think me is a pleasure friend. You know, so one expect utility, one expect pleasure. What's going on? And he talk about the recipient side should judge whether that is better or worthwhile. Okay, or the giver, okay, should fix the worth of benefit. And then he talked about dissolve of friendship. And he asked, can I be a friend to myself, so-called self-love? And he said, self-love is not selfishness, right? So excellent person treat themselves the way they will treat a close friend. So something like love yourself. If you, who's the person? Jordan Peterson, right? He talked about self-rule of life. He talked about love yourself. Okay, I think this kind of thing. He talked about virtuous friend represent self-love. Vicious friend represent self-loathing, right? So he talked about some virtue like goodwill, concord, benevolence, and then of course you are not surprised. you ask this kind of question, right? How many friends do we need? I think that's typical Stoic philosopher also like talk about this kind of question. Probably Stoic would not like have too many friends, but I sort of talk about utility friends. You need a few. Okay, pleasure friends, few are enough. That's his word. And the good friend should be as many as possible. So that's his view on how many friends. And then he talk about the okay, does a truly happy person need a friend? Can you happy by yourself? Okay, his answer is yes. Okay, you need a friend because friends are the greatest external good. Happiness is an activity, not something you can own. So even you are self-happy, okay, pursuing happy, you still need friends. Okay, and the friend is a community, and they learn and grow each other. So you can, it's not surprising he is growing his ethical theory to his political philosophy. America, please.
Yeah, where does he put mentorship, which was very popular with the Greeks? You know, the older
Excuse me,
man
I'm
with the
missing your
young
word. You mean
mentorship.
mentor, like a teacher student?
Right, right. Because that's, where does he put it, in love? Or because that was very typical, right? The old
Yeah.
man and the young.
I think he put it in the education, in the politics. He remember in the last part of politics, he talked about education, and he talked about the learning. I think that's the mentorship. You know, at least I think this way. But I don't know. You know, anybody have a better answer, or anybody can help me on this answer? And that's the best I can.
No, I would think that it could be all three, depending on what kind of a relationship you have between mentor and the, let's say, and the pupil, or teacher and the pupil. It could be a good friend. It could be a real friend, because if they, like, I know Socrates considered some of his pupils real friends, and it could be just if someone just enjoys listening, and that's it. It could be that kind, you know, or it could be utilitarian. You just want to learn.
Yeah.
You know.
So my swimming coach is my utility friend, right? Put this way.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Greg. I think that's a good answer. But I don't think he mentioned this one, right? Mentorship. Greg, do you think he talked about this?
No, I don't think it's mentorship is equal to friendship. It's just a different kind of relationship, but it depends on what kind of relationship you have between mentor and the recipient.
Okay.
Well, the thing is, he organized everything. He describes everything, and mentorship was, I mean, everything was very, very.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was
everything was sexual, and was learning,
right,
and was
right.
respect, and there was a lot of things. But
Well, when
I find it strange that he doesn't describe or puts a, you know, a cubicle for that, because he names everything. And friendship, I mean, mentorship was so important.
actually the relationship between older and younger man, especially in the army, he actually thought about this as a perfect friendship. It would be like the best friendship. It's you know, it would definitely fall into the good friends if you're talking about that. But there could be different kind of mentorships. You know, if you're just a teacher, you know, but you know, the typical ones that you're talking about, how often you know, relationship formed between the older male and a younger male, that doesn't have to be sexual. Could be sexual, could be just sensual or intellectual. You know, that would fall under the good friends.
Well, thank you for the answer. Yeah. Okay, so let's move to the last part so we can finish on time. Okay, so here I think it's simple. Okay, and you're not surprised, right? Basically, he has to deal with at the book 1. He talked about the eudaimonia. So finally, he will end this one with eudaimonia, the pleasure and the happiness. So here he has to deal with pleasure with prudence. That's the repeat, and the temperance is provide the highest good, and the highest good will be self-sufficient. That's the final goal. Happiness is a self-sufficient activity and the desire in its own right. And the happiness is a good activity, not amusement. So virtuous people, they have the virtuous pleasure is from good activity, good desire. And the base pleasure is from bad activity, bad desire. So pleasure, if you do it rightly, okay, correctly, it's good, okay. And then he also emphasized the contemplative life is happiness. Okay, so the wise man is the possessor of philosophic wisdom and the wisdom about unchanging truth and the object. Okay, so which is talk about in book 4, and the wise man will more than anyone be happy, wise, the intellectual happiness. So we are made good in nature, teaching and habitation. So legislation is needed if the end to be attained. So here, the last word he's talking about is a transition to politics, which I believe it answer Fred's raised question last week. Is good citizens, okay, are necessary for good state, right? So the answer here, I think is yes, because he's talking about virtue. He talk about ethical people, and then his final goal is to have a legislation and then to have an ideal city state. I think that's what he want to do. And then we are 6:30 now, and then I will open for like a 10 minutes discussion if you want to have anything, and then just finish on time. And I hope I can have more time, but turn out, little bit wrong over time. Fred, please.
Regarding your last slide, your previous slide, I should say.
This one? Yeah.
Yes. I'm not sure that just seems inconsistent with what Aristotle said earlier about conditions for happiness, because Aristotle put great emphasis, it seems, on action, energeia, actualization. And so I think he, right, as I recall, explicitly said that reason is not enough, contemplation is not enough, that the happy person is one who applies his reason to a good end. So he's highly practical in that sense, which I think is good of Aristotle. So I'm not sure that
You mean this one?
Aristotle, yeah, the contemplative life is a happiness.
I agree with what you said, but actually this sentence I copied from his word. Okay, so he talked about contemplative life is happiness. Probably I didn't, but remember he talked about intellectual virtue. He also talked about contemplative. Okay, so one way to look at it is contemplation is not enough, just contemplation, but contemplative life is, we can consider as virtue.
I think number 2, happiness is a self-sufficient activity. That probably would kind of fit into what Fred was saying.
Yes.
It's an action.
I think he talks about contemplation as a meaning that intellectual, you are thinking about something, you pause, you don't act, without thinking, without meditating, without thinking before. And because thinking is so important for him, I think that's what contemplation
Yes,
is
he also
here.
talk about the pursuing knowledge for the sake of
Right.
knowledge, right? So that's also contemplative
He's
life.
also saying the contemplative life is the happiest.
Douglas, excuse me, does he say the contemplative life is the happiest?
Yeah,
You agree?
that's what I'm, yeah, uh-huh.
Okay,
think that's-
so, okay.
I'm more in
That-
accord with.
That's what philosophers do.
Yeah, but
Right, I'm more in accord with the third bullet. Happiness is good activity. That seems very Aristotelian to me.
yeah, but in general, okay, we will know. I think we all can agree. Aristotle is focused more on the activity and what you do than just what you think. So we will. Let me probably stop here, and then thank you everyone. And any last comment? Anybody want to everything? Okay.
Very
So,
good.
Yeah,
No,
thank
this
you.
was great. It was
Yeah,
very,
this
very
was really good. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And then, be honest, I think it's more difficult than I thought to summarize this book. I thought it could be easy because I read it before, but turned out it's not that easy. But anyway, I make it. So, and I hope I make it clear. And then I think from now on, I finish the most difficult part, I think. But I think from next week, remember next week has no meeting, and we will continue on September 5th, and then, which is a holiday. So we will continue on that day, and then we are going to deal with Ionian school, and Heraclitus is one of that. If you can, please read it, and then we can discuss some of the verses of Heraclitus, because I know they have a meetup. They discuss line by line, and then, but I'm not going to do this way, but it's also interesting experience. You just
Can I ask you a question, Jason?
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
wondering, do you share the documents that you use for
Oh
your
yes,
meetups?
let me share this one. Let me just 1 minute. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So just 1 minute. Let me share how some people may not know how to do it, and then okay. So let's say if you go to the sign up page, right? That's the you can see my screen. That's the sign up page, right? So here, okay, video and the file for Greek-Roman philosophy. You click this one, okay. So you will see a spreadsheet, okay. So this one, the PowerPoint file, you can see it, and then YouTube, you can see it. So is that clear?
Well, what do I go to the side? What's the other part?
On the meetup site,
Oh, okay.
On the middle side, you have if you look at down, you have the video and the file for Greco-Roman philosophy. And
Okay.
the fresh,
On the meetup. Okay.
okay, and thank you,
Thanks a lot.
everyone. And see you 2 weeks from now. Thank you, Greg. Thank
Yes.
you.
Hey.
Enjoy your Monday off, Jason.
All right.
Take care. Bye.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye, all.
Jason, before you go, can you hear
Yes,
me?
please.
This is Yan. Okay, I was
Hold on,
wondering,
maybe Ian, just 1 minute. Let me